Hi everyone. In the previous video we explained how to pass the state between the widgets, and we have like this example. We have the main widget here like this. Whenever I click the button here, this state will change, the counter will change, increment 1 2 3 4 and so on. And whenever this state is changed, I want to rebuild the widget, but the widget not here in the main. I want to rebuild the widget in the child here. I mean this widget here. We have a child dashboard. Here I have dashboard. In the dashboard we have a children counter 1 and counter 2. So in the counter 1 counter 2 I want to change the widget. I want to rebuild the widget. And in the previous lecture I explained how to pass the widget using the constructor. This way it's working, but there is some problems in this way. The first thing here, your application will be very complicated and very confusing, especially to manage your state in the application, because you can see I have now just 4 widgets, right? It's plain like this. I have just 4 widgets here. I want to pass this state from this widget to this to this. But what if I have 10 widgets, or I have 20 widgets, or 50 widgets, or more than? Also, maybe I have a lot of states, not just one state like this simple application. So here you can see it is just a simple application, and it's confusing because here I add the constructor to pass the state to the dashboard, and then from dashboard I also have constructor to pass it to the counter, and then using in the counter. So imagine if you have an application, a real world application, a very big application, and you have a lot of states, a lot of widgets. It is very difficult to track your application or your widget or your state in the widget. It's very difficult to manage your widget in this application. Also, another problem here, for example, when the widget is when the state is changed and I want to rebuild the widget here, right? To pass the state from this widget to the child, to the dashboard. But actually I don't need the state in the dashboard, in this widget. I just using the dashboard as mediators to pass the state to another widget, to this child, right? So also it does affect the performance of the application, because I pass the state to the widget, but actually I don't need to use this state in the widget. So you can imagine if you have a bigger application, you need to pass the state from widget to widget to another. Also, it will be not a good way to do that. Also here I should use the stateful widget always. For example here, because I want to manage the state, I want to store the state in the widget. So here I should using the stateful widget state, and I have a stateful widget. Also, stateful widget affect the performance of application. It is better if I using just a stateless widget in the application. So to solve this problem, I have a lot of ways. I have a lot of ways or paradigms to work with the state or to manage the state in my application. We have a block pattern, for example, we have MVP pattern, we have an inherited widget, and also we have our provider. The Google company in the last conference for Flutter recommended developer to using the provider. So in today's lecture, I'm gonna explain how to convert this application, my application, I make it in the previous, to using the provider. So now the first thing, what's the provider? So provider, now it's the provider. Provider like a storage of state. Instead of I store my state in the stateful widget here, for example, and then pass it to this and to this, instead of that, I create a storage. This storage, I create a storage called the provider, and inside this storage, I store all my states in my application. So here, I add the provider, add like a storage called provider. This storage or this provider will be a parent or a root for my application, because if I want to access the state from the provider, so the provider should be a parent of my widget or a root in the widget. So here I should add it above this here as a parent of the counter pro. So now instead of I store the widget, the state here, I just store the state here, counter state in the provider. So now if I need the counter here in this widget, I don't need to pass it to this and this. I just from here, I can pass directly to this widget. So here, this provider work as observable, and here this widget subscribe to this provider. I mean listening to this provider, to this storage. And also here I need the counter here, right, in this widget. Also I just subscribe this widget to the storage. I mean this widget now listening to the storage, and this widget also listening to the storage. So now the counter here, whenever the counter change in the provider, that means the listener will get a notification from the provider and will change the widget or rebuild the widget depending on changing in the counter. So here the counter now like a storage of states. So I have a state in the storage, and I have a widget listening to this storage. Whenever the state or variable change in the storage, send a notification to all the listener. I have a change. So this widget does subscribe it or does listening to the provider would rebuild depending on the change in the state. So here we have observer pattern like this. Here a provider here observable called observable. It's a provider, and in the provider in the observable I have the state, and the counter, for example, widget called subscriber or listener. Listen to the provider or listen to the observable. Whenever this observable change, as a counter state in this observable would change. So it is 1, 2, 3. This listener will get a notify. That means there's something change, and then rebuild the widget. So here in my application, I want to convert it to using now, for example, the first thing, I don't need the stateful widget because I don't need to store the state in the widget. When I using the stateful widget, that means I need to store the state in the widget. But here I will store the state in the provider, so I don't need the stateful widget. So here, go to the application. The first thing, we have a main. I will convert the main to the stateless widget. And also I don't need the state because the state will be in the provider. So I delete the state here. Also I don't need set state now because the state will change in the provider, not here, nothing here. Also the dashboard, I don't need the constructor. I will delete the constructor in the dashboard because I don't need to pass the state here. Counter pro, I just add it here. Also on the dashboard, I go to the dashboard, and in the dashboard I don't need anything. I don't need the constructor here. And go to the counter. Also I don't need the constructor. I will delete every constructors here. Also I will delete this now. For example 0, just for example. And then here also I don't need anything. Make it 0, for example. Now application, I think there is no problem, but yes, here of course in the counter, because I delete the constructor, so I should delete it from here. You don't need to pass anything. Now I complete. You can see now my application just like this. Just I have a 0 and I cannot do anything. Now I want to using the provider and add the counter state store in the provider, and I don't need to pass the state to any class here, to any widget here, just here, and there is a listener, counter 1 and counter 2. Just subscribe and as a listener in the provider to the provider. Whenever the counter change, notify or send a notification to the counter 1 and counter 2. So the first thing I want to add this class provider, right? So the first thing I want to add, go to the pubspec.yaml, and add the provider here. You should add the provider package. This is an external package, so you should add the provider here and just package get. After complete here, I want to add this class, provider class. So here, just go here in the library and add this class. Right click and new and Dart file, and I want to add the provider. You can name it anything, for example counter provider, because it's for counter. Now I add the provider and create a new provider called counter provider. I just want to import the material dot and then add the class counter provider. Here I can make it with using the mixing with change notifier. When I add change notifier to this class, that means I add the listening capabilities to this class. I explain here, I want to make this class listenable or it is observable. I mean, this class will listen to the provider, and this class or this widget will listen to this provider. So change notifier give the class the ability to listening from another widget. It is listenable. That means observable class. So I can listen to this class. So here I add this. Now I just want to add the counter, integer counter equals 0, for example. Just instead of I using the counter in the main class here, now I just delete everything from here and I add the counter here to the provider, not here. And now I want to add a method increment, for example, to when I click the button, I want to increment 1 to the 0 to the 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So here I can add void, not return anything, just a method, and an increment, just counter, and here I will say notify listener. That means I said before, in this class I have a listener, this and this. Whenever this change in increment here, this change plus plus, I want to notify, to send notification to all the listener, to this and this. Maybe you have 10 listener or 100 listener. All those listener will get a notify there is some change here. So should rebuild the widget. Now I complete everything about listener. Now I have just this and an agreement and notify when I complete. After that I want to subscribe. I said here I want to make this class in the root, in a parent of my widget. So here I need this counter where I need it here, right? In counter pro, and I need it here and here. So I want to make it as a parent for this, right? In the main. So here how can I do that? Just go to the main, because I need it in the main also. I need to use it in the button. When I press button, I want to increment. So here you can see the main here, counter pro. I want to make it as a parent for this. Just click here and here wrap with widget. I want to add a parent for this. Call it what here? Change notifier provider. Just make it as a parent. And what is the type of it? The type of it is counter provider here. So I will add the counter provider here. Counter provider. Add it here. So now it is a parent for this. And also of course you should import it. Now it is automatically import this class. Now after that, this is a child. Now it's just a child. But here I want to add an create here, like a builder called create. I want to create what? Just here I don't have a context, so just ignore context like this. And add, I want to build the counter provider. So here just counter provider again. So here I make by using change notifier, I just subscribe the counter provider, this provider as a parent of counter pro. So now the counter provider will be here and the parent, right? So now I just want to using it in the counter 1 and counter 2. It is a listener. I want to subscribe the counter 1 and counter 2 and also counter pro to this provider. I want to make it listen to this provider. So here the first thing, if I want to do that, now I want to using here, right? In the counter pro and this class. So just go here in the build, because I want context, so go in the build. And for example, I want to add var c or counter, count for example, anything, equal what? Equal provider dot of the name of the class, provider class, counter provider, and context. Now I add this here, you can see. Now this provider, that means I can use in count from provider, because it's just a listening to the provider. So here I want to use one on press. I need here, when I press here, I want to call the from provider, call the increment, right? So here just say I have the count from provider, so just say here count dot increment. Now whenever I click here, increment in the provider will call and then notify listener. That means this will change and notify all listener there's something changing. So here I complete in the main class. Now I want also to call the provider or to using the provider in the counter 1, counter 2, right? So go to the counter 1 and counter 2 directly. So in the counter 1, for example, also same thing, provider, also should import it here, and context. sorry, here just dot off, and I have context. And now I need using here, instead of 0, I just using count dot what? I don't need an increment now. I just need using the counter variable dot to string, because this integer to string. Now here it is counter. I just using the counter. When I click in the button, will increment and notify. That means it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. So just I using the counter here. Same thing. Go to the counter 2. Also in the build. Also var. Also I need to using the counter here. So counter sorry, count dot counter. Here just I import provider. Click here, import the library, and then here count dot counter dot to string, just like this. Now I complete. I just run the application. Now you can see if I click here, same thing, it is work. Very easy. The first thing I create the provider, counter provider, like this here, and I add a counter in the provider, and also I add the counter, and also add an increment method to change the state, and change the state, and notifier. Here I add with change notifier mixing with change notifier. That means I add the listening capabilities to this provider, so the widget can listen to this provider. I add the state here and an agreement to change the state, agreement by 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, and notify our listener there's something changed. Now I want to subscribe or to add this provider as a root of my application, because I need it here and here and here. So I want to add it as a parent of counter pro. So go to the counter pro. In the main, I have counter pro here, stateless widget. Everything is stateless widget now. Instead of just counter pro here, I just added change notifier provider, and the type of it counter provider, and just to create a counter provider. Now it is a parent for change pro. After that, I just make it a parent. I want to subscribe the listener, so I needed the first thing I needed here. I need in this class counter pro. So just go to in this class counter pro and just add the count provider dot of the type of provider, the name of the provider, counter provider, and context, and then I have a count. Just from here, when I press the button, when I press this button here, I want to call an agreement from the count, from the provider, an agreement. Whenever I click click an agreement and notify the listener. Also, I need it here in the counter. This is a listener. So go to the counter, just same thing, just using this, and then I want just counter from provider. Counter will be 0, and when I click will be 1, 2, and notify this listener. And also I need it in the counter 2, same thing. Now here I have provider. I need this to, when I click button here, this will change here, and then notify all the listener here, this and this, there's something changed, and will rebuild the widget, rebuild this widget depending on this changing in the state. So will be like this. Also, if you have hundreds of counters, for example, you can add whatever, anything, any number of counter you need. Same thing, just whenever you need to listen to the provider, just using this. I hope it was useful. I hope you understand that. Thank you very much.